Hi guys, I'm Nina. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I do videos on motherhood and lifestyle content. And in today's video, I'm going to be talking about my top 5 tips for having a natural labor and delivery. I currently have a 23-month-old Jaden, and I have a newborn Lily who is almost 3 months old. And I did have 2 natural labor and deliveries for both of my children. And although they were both natural births, they were so different from each other. If you have not already watched my birth story videos or my birth vlog with Liliana, I will link those down below. If you've seen those, you know that my birth with Jaden and with Liliana were complete opposites. With Jaden, I did struggle a lot with the pain of giving birth, and it was a very difficult experience for me. Whereas with Liliana, it was such a peaceful process. Not that I didn't feel any pain or experience any hardship during the birth, but I was able to cope with the contractions and cope with each wave that came so much better than my first birth. And there were a few key things that I did differently during my second birth that I really feel like made all of the difference. And I really wish I had known these tips with my first birth. So I'm going to share them with you guys today. Hopefully, if you are preparing to give birth yourself or you're just interested in learning more about natural labor delivery, this video will be helpful to you and you'll be able to know some things that I wish that I had known before my first birth. Both of my births were at the hospital, so don't feel like if you're not having a home birth, you can't have a natural labor and delivery. You absolutely can choose to have one wherever you're at. And even if you decide not to, you are the one who's going to make the best decision for you and for your baby. So I'm going to jump right in. My first tip when it comes to having a natural labor and delivery to help cope with the pain is to do counter pressure. So this was huge for my second birth, was having my husband or having your birth partner do counter pressure with each contraction. I can link a video down below on how I learned how to do the counter pressure. I particularly had my husband do the double hip squeeze, which is where he would put the palms of his hands on the outside of my hips and he would squeeze and apply pressure with every single contraction that I had. There are different ways of doing counter pressure. You can also do the palm of your hands on the lower part of your back, which I did have my husband try that during birth, but I wasn't the biggest fan of it. I had him switch back to doing the double hip squeeze. One point towards the end of the delivery, I did also have him do counter pressure on my shoulders, of just applying like a light pressure massage onto my shoulders and upper back. So there are a few different ways that you can do it, but it really helps with the pain of the contraction. I remember there was a few contractions where I had to use the restroom, or for whatever reason he missed doing the counter pressure, and it made such a difference from him doing the counter pressure versus facing the contractions without that counter pressure. So I highly suggest talking about this with your birth partner long before it's time to give birth. My husband and I would watch videos together on counter pressure, and honestly, it can be quite a workout for the birth partner because it is applying pressure and using your muscles, and it can get tiring, especially if you have a long labor and delivery. So it is important that your birth partner is aware that it's going to take some work on their end too, and give them time to kind of like mentally and physically prepare for that as well. If you are able to have a doula, then that's even better. You can have your doula apply the counter pressure and take some of that off of your birth partner. But if you don't have a doula, having your birth partner prepared and ready to do counter pressure is huge when it comes to coping with contractions. My second tip for coping with the pains of labor is using a comb to help relieve some of that pain. So what I would do is with each contraction, I would squeeze the comb so it was creating some sensation in my fingers, and that helped divert my mind from the pain of the contraction because I would feel a little sting in my hand from squeezing on the comb. I wasn't squeezing to the point where it was causing any cuts or anything like that in my hand, but it was just creating a sensation that helped distract my mind from the pain of the contraction. contractions. I had one of these combs. I started using it when I was at home going into labor when I was probably around 3 or 4 centimeters, even though I didn't know it yet at that time. And then I had accidentally left it in the car with me when I was driving to the hospital. So once I got situated into my hospital room, I did ask the nurse to bring me a comb, and she was super sweet and brought me one, and I did use it for the remainder of my contractions all the way up until I was about 9 centimeters and I was getting ready to start pushing. So I really love this technique. Again, I wish I would have known this my first time around, and it definitely made a big difference. The third tip that I have is to practice breathing. And honestly, guys, I know that sounds super basic, and I used to hear it all the time when I was looking up videos and doing some research on giving birth and natural labor and delivery. I would hear people say, practice your breathing. And I remember with my first birth, just feeling completely out of control when it came to breathing. There was one point during my first birth that my husband even tried to help me breathe, and I basically just told him to stop talking, and I was hyperventilating. I was completely out of control when it came to my breathing. And so this time around, I was really determined to be in control of my breaths, and it really made a difference as far as mentally, and not only mentally, but also physically. So I would practice some of the Bridget Taylor breathing techniques from Built to Birth. I'll link a video down below that I watched, and I would practice breathing when I was using the restroom. Also, if I was going for a walk. So I would try and go for a walk for about at least 10 minutes every day. And during those walks, I would practice deep breathing. So I would practice taking a super long inhale and a super slow exhale, and really just being mindful of breathing down. So breathing like belly breathing versus breathing in and out of my chest. Again, that's a whole topic, so you can do a ton of research when it comes to breathing, but actually going in and practicing my breathing every single day leading up to birth, especially in the 3rd trimester, helps prepare me. So when I was in birth, it almost came naturally to me. I would just do exactly what I had practiced. And in being in control of my breaths really helped calm my body down and help me feel in control of my birth in general. There was only one point when I was pushing that I started to lose control of my breathing, and I remember I mentally started spiraling and getting nervous, and then my doctor actually helped me. She said, no, you're not doing this. You've been in control this whole time. And I went back to taking control of each breath, and I was able to switch back into a different mindset and go right back to pushing. So I will say, practicing your breathing and being in control of your breaths starting from the very beginning of going into labor makes such a big difference. So when I was at home and I first started feeling the contractions, even though they weren't painful yet, I already started going into that mental state of taking deep, long breaths during the contractions and just focusing on one breath at a time, even before it got painful. So that way, once it started to pick up and the contractions did start to feel more intense, I was already focusing on each breath and in control of each breath as they came. So practice your breathing. That's my 3rd tip. Along with that, my 4th tip is to prepare mentally for birth. I think that birth is such a mental battle, even more so than a physical one. I truly believe that you don't have to have a high pain tolerance or have to be a super person to give birth. I do think that giving birth is such a natural thing that we are literally built to do. And so yes, there is some physical preparation that I think can be beneficial for birth. Even more so, I think the mental preparation is so key to having a natural birth. Yeah, you agree? So realistically, what does mentally preparing for birth look like? For me, it was doing a lot of research, watching videos of other women giving birth, finding the type of births that I wanted to have. So looking up peaceful births and really just preparing my mind that it was possible to have a beautiful, peaceful birth. After my first birth, I wasn't even sure whether it was possible. It felt like it would be an impossible task to have a wonderful birth story, but I did not let that doubt control my mind, because if I would have, there's no way I would have been able to have another natural birth. So really just taking control of my thoughts and starting birthing affirmations to mentally prepare for birth before it was time to give birth. So in my 3rd trimester, every day I would read over some birthing affirmations, and I would tell myself that I was made to do this, that I was going to be able to do this, that my body was ready. I had a Spotify playlist that had some hypnobirthing affirmations that I would listen to before going to bed each night, and I actually had them on my playlist when it came time to birth as well. During the birthing process, I had some of those hypnobirthing soundtracks playing on my phone, and I was mentally repeating those affirmations to myself during the birth, before the birth, and that made a big difference mentally, to feel like I've got this and I can do this. With my first birth, I was only a few centimeters in, and I remember being in tears and telling myself, I can't do this, like I'm not going to be able to do this, and telling my husband there's no way I'm going to be able to make it. So I was already setting myself up for failure mentally by having that mindset. Whereas the second time around, I was 6 centimeters, and I remember telling my husband like, oh my gosh, I got this, I'm already halfway done. So my mental shift was completely different for each birth, and it impacted the way that I was thinking and also the way that I was feeling during the birthing process. So definitely mentally prepare, do your research, tell yourself affirmations, and believe that you can do it. My last tip, and one that I would suggest, is hypnobirthing. So I remember when I first heard about hypnobirthing, I honestly thought that it was weird. I was like, okay, this is a little extreme, a little extra. But for my second birth, I decided to have a Christian perspective on hypnobirthing. And what that is really is just going inwards during your birth. So I told my husband from the get-go, once I start having contractions, do not talk to me during the contractions. Do not let any nurse, any staff member, do not let anyone break my concentration during my contractions. So I would even put in my headphones, and I would just zone in when it came time to the contractions, but also in between the contractions. That was my time to mentally and physically recharge. So keeping that space of a just peaceful atmosphere, keeping that peaceful mindset and going inward with each contraction was super important, of not breaking that mental focus. For me, it looked like not having very many cervical checks. I didn't have an IV. I wasn't hooked up to the monitor the whole time. Advocating for those little things to have as least interventions as possible helped me to stay inward and to really focus on what I needed to do and get pushing and breathing the baby downwards and out. So there's a lot that I could say on hypnobirthing, but I just suggest that you do your own research, look up some videos on it. But Christian hypnobirthing was something that really helped me the second time around as well. Those were the top 5 tips that helped me have a peaceful, joyful birth. I will give a little bonus tip. One more thing that made a big difference between my first and second natural birth is that my first time around, I was induced. I did not have Pitocin, but I did have Cytotec, which is, I believe, a little bit less of an extreme drug than the Pitocin, but it did still make a huge impact on my contractions. Whereas the second time around, I went into labor naturally, and I will say that the contractions felt very different the second time than the first time I gave birth. So if at all possible, obviously talk to your doctor, do what's best for you, and do what your doctor advises, as long as you have a doctor that you trust and you feel like is going to make the best decisions for you and for your baby, not just for themselves. Then I would say, if at all possible, try to go into labor naturally versus being induced, which I know can be very, very hard, because in those last few weeks and even months of pregnancy, at least for me, I was at a point where I was ready to get the baby out. I did not want to be pregnant any longer. I wanted my baby girl in my hands. So I know that it is very hard and very tempting to just want to have the baby out as soon as possible. But if possible, again, I would suggest waiting to go into labor naturally if you want to have a natural labor and delivery to help with the pain of the contractions. So those were my tips. I hope that they were helpful to you. If you have any tips or any things that help you with your natural labor and delivery, or if you are preparing for birth yourself, I would love to hear your thoughts. If this video was helpful for you, please don't forget to give it a like. If you are interested in more motherhood and lifestyle videos, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, and I will see you in my next video. Thanks for watching.